Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Television Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Leah Naomi. I'm excited about today's episode because we're going to take a deep dive into American Horror Story, the show from FX. And of course, later in the show, we're going to do Set It on Reddit. First, let's start out by going through some of the show's stats. It got an 8.1 out of 10 on IMDb. 76% on Rotten Tomatoes, and 95% of Google users like the show. American Horror Story just wrapped up its 9th season called AHS 1984. So I'm really excited to get to fill you guys in on that. But we are going to start at the beginning. We're going to start with Murder House. So there's been 9 total seasons. Each one is a separate storyline with a beginning, middle, and end all to itself. A lot of the actors that are in each season play different characters in other subsequent seasons. I think that's one of the things that I really find entertaining about the show. And of course, a lot of the newer seasons have some wonderful guest stars as well. So we'll go through each of those and a little bit of trivia as we work our way through all of the seasons of American Horror Story. All right, here we go. Murder House is season 1 of American Horror Story. It aired in 2011. It centers on the Harmon family, Dr. Ben Harmon, Vivian, and their daughter Violet, who move from Boston to Los Angeles after Vivian has a miscarriage and Ben has an affair. They move into a restored mansion, unaware that the house is haunted by the ghosts of its former residents and their victims. I really like the way that this description wraps up what the show is about, because that really is what the first season is. Murder House, the first time I tried to watch it, being really honest with you, I was not a fan. I did not understand what the show was supposed to be. Overall, horror is my favorite genre, and I love thrillers and adventure-type movies and shows, and I just hadn't seen anything like this, and I didn't know where the story was going. And so the first attempt that I made back when it was coming out on TV in 2011, I stopped watching a few episodes in. Now, later, once you could binge it on Netflix and a couple of seasons were out, I decided, this show's really popular. I should probably give it another try. So I started again with Murder House, and holy moly, I absolutely fell in love with the show. I don't know what my problem was that first time around. I just must not have been in the mood or something. But on the second watch, I fell in love. By the end of the first season, I was all in and could not wait to see what else they were going to do. At that time, I hadn't realized that the second season was going to be a totally different story. So again, a little learning curve on my part, but it was the first time something like this had happened. The show did win numerous awards for being so just crazy cool, I guess. Some trivia that I thought was interesting from this first season. There's one of the characters who dies and discovers their body. And when that character discovers their own body, they are not faking their reaction. The scream everything is genuine. That particular actor had not seen their body double and absolutely freaked out. They caught it, and that's what ended up making the final cut. I find that to be very interesting. Also, Zachary Quinto, who plays a gay man in this show, hadn't actually come out as gay at the time of the airing. He did come out shortly after. I find the timing on that really awesome and empowering that, I like to think that something about being that character and having it be so well received may have helped him to actually step up and come out and be who he is. So that is Murder House. Now we're going to move on to Season 2. Season 2 of American Horror Story is called Asylum. This aired in 2012. Of course, it's a whole new setting, a whole new set of characters, but many of them are played by the same actors. This season begins in 1964 at the fictional mental institution Briarcliff Manor, following the stories of the staff and inmates who occupy it, and intercuts with events in the past and present. Returning cast members from the previous season include Zachary Quinto, Sarah Paulson, Evan Peters, Lily Raby, Jessica Lange, Dylan McDermott, and Francis Conroy. And for me, the most notable guest star for this particular season was Joseph Fiennes, who also played He Who Must Not Be Named, Lord Voldemort, in the Harry Potter series. Now, while the first season takes place in a beautiful house, in a normal neighborhood, and in regular everyday life, Asylum really takes place in a gritty, dirty, tainted asylum. The whole environment is different. The flavor and feel is absolutely palpable. I really, really enjoyed this particular season of the show. I've watched it through twice, at least, maybe more. Now, this particular season is pretty graphic. There are a lot of butt shots in the season. There's some canings and some of the clothing that the prisoners wear, that sort of thing. And so actually this particular season earned itself the nickname Asylum, which I thought was pretty funny. I had to share that with you guys. Another little interesting tidbit that I found in this season is Dr. Tredson's character is played by Zachary Quinto, who, as I already mentioned, is openly gay. His character in this particular season actually advocates behavior modification to treat and cure homosexuality. So there's a little bit of irony there. One of the things that this show does well is giving nods to developmentally disabled type characters. Even in the first season, there's an actress who has Down syndrome who's playing an amazing character, and she shows up in several other seasons as well. There is an actress named Naomi Grossman who plays Pepper, who is a pinhead character, who is also developmentally delayed. She becomes one of the most lovable characters in this season, even though she's not maybe the most prominent character. She also had to go through an extremely grueling makeup process in order to play that character. So I find that really interesting. And she did a great job in acting in the role, and this character also shows up in another season. Adding to the layer of creepiness and authenticity in the show, most of the seasons have some ties to real history and things that have happened. For Asylum in particular, Sarah Paulson's character is an undercover person. She goes undercover at Briarcliff to do an expose on immoral practices, but in reality, she's based on Donna J. Stone, who went undercover to expose Willowbrook's criminal practices. Of course, it played out a little bit differently for her, and ultimately, Geraldo Rivera was the one who actually shut down Willowbrook with an expose. But it does add a level of creepiness knowing that something similar, in some ways has happened out there in the world. I mean, on that point, asylums in general have a really creepy sort of aura to them. Most of them were used more like a prison to go and throw people who were different, who were challenged in any sort of way. Because of the way that the laws used to be, a husband who was no longer fond of their wife could have them committed and no longer have to speak with them or deal with them. There's been lots of different movies and shows about it. And because of that and beginnings of mental health services and some of the more brutal practices that went along with the beginning of that type of work, not everybody who was put into an institution was treated very well. And as funding went away and supervision wasn't great, there's some pretty awful stories out there. So I think an asylum is a magnificent setting for a horror movie. I would never be that person who goes to sleep in an asylum for any amount of money overnight, because I'm just going to play it safe. All right. Well, that's it for season 1 and season 2. When we come back from break, we're going to start talking about American Horror Story Season 3, The Coven.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back. We've been talking about American Horror Story. We have reached season 3, The Coven, which came out in 2013. This season takes place in New Orleans. It follows a coven of witches that descended from Salem as they fight for survival. It also features some flashbacks to 1692 during the infamous Salem witch trials, the 1830s, 1910s, 1960s, 1970s, and 1990s. This particular season has a lot of returning cast members from the first 2 seasons, and the most notable additions to the cast would be Emma Roberts, Kathy Bates, Angela Bassett, and Gabori Sidibe. I absolutely loved this particular season. I thought the acting was great. Some of the characters in this particular season are so lovable and interesting. I couldn't stop watching. I binged this series as quickly as I could, basically swallowed it whole. No regrets there, by the way. So that is something that I highly recommend that you do. I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but American Horror Story is available to binge on Netflix, so definitely sign in and get to watching. Okay, so The Coven. It was so popular when it first started to air, maybe because of the change in cast or the additions to the cast, that it added 5.5 million viewers to the view list. That is amazing. Also, each individual episode of this particular season got really high ratings. If you look on IMDb, you can check that out. And I can understand why the ratings, again, great characters, great acting, but the environment that this particular season takes place in is also very interesting and rife with real history. Once again, this season is playing off of some real-life history mixed in with a whole lot of fiction. I think one of the most notable real-life characters is Madame Delphine Lalaurie, who is played by Kathy Bates. She was a prominent New Orleans socialite in the 1800s. She was discovered to have tortured and killed many of her slaves in her Chamber of Horrors. Her house is still said to be haunted to this day. I also believe it's a place that you can go to take a tour. So if you're into that sort of thing, there you go. Another notable character that was based on true life would have to be Marie Laveau. Marie Laveau is played by Angela Bassett in the show. She's an ancient voodoo queen of New Orleans. In reality, she was a revered woman in the city back in the 1820s and 1860s. She practiced black magic just like she did on the show, but she was a hairdresser on the side. She was known for being a nurse and a healer. So really, she garnered a lot of respect from her community. The way that they integrate her character into the show, I think, is very clever and very well done. Overall, I found the story arc in this particular season to be really fascinating. I highly recommend that you watch it. And if you're going to binge through to the more current seasons, you're definitely going to want to watch this one because there's some callback characters in the future, which is great. But I don't want to spoil any of that for you. So instead, I'm going to smoothly transition on to season 4, Freak Show. This came out in 2014. Now, Freak Show is probably my third favorite of all of the seasons overall. The reason that I'm in love with this show is there's something about the freak show and circus sort of atmosphere that just gets all of my creepy senses tingling. It just reminds me of the original Freak Show movie in black and white. One of us. Absolutely fabulous, creepy filmmaking. But after all, that was always the intention of the freak show or the sideshows in the circus, was to, grasp your creativity and draw you in with wonder and awe. Unfortunately, the people who were on display were not always treated well. They were taken advantage of. But also, unfortunately, the way that the society was at the time, it actually gave a lot of autonomy and control for some of those individuals in their lives that they would not have had in regular society. So I guess it's a mixed bag. But overall, having been a caregiver of developmentally disabled adults and having studied psychology, I am very happy that our world does not function in quite the same way today. But as far as a horror anthology series is concerned, Freak Show is a wonderful season of American Horror Story. This particular season is mainly set in 1952 in Juniper, Florida, telling the story of one of the last remaining freak shows in the United States and their struggle for survival. There's, again, a lot of notable returning cast members. Some of our favorite characters come back, including Kathy Bates, Angela Bassett, Jessica Lange, and Sarah Paulson happens to be one of my favorites that's on the show, with some special guest stars, Michael Chiklis, Finn Wittrock, John Carroll Lynch, and Ben Wolfe. My favorite returning cast member, though, has to be Naomi Grossman returning as Pepper. Oh, Pepper. One thing that I am particularly happy about from this season, especially considering the sensitive nature of capturing people with disabilities, is that many of the characters, the character has a disability and the actor shares that disability. For instance, Legless Susie, has the same condition. Paul, Ma Petite, and Meep are all characters that have that condition in real life. So kudos to them for that. And while my season's favorite character, Pepper, is not played by somebody who has that particular disorder, she is based on a real life character, and so is Salty, her husband in the show. They are inspired by the Schultzes Surtees, known as the Schultzes the Pinhead, from the early 1900s sideshow performer. They have microcephaly, a neurodevelopmental disorder that causes an unusually small brain and skull. He had the cognizance of a 3-year-old and could only speak in single-syllable words. He was mostly known because of his part in the 1932 film Freaks, which I already mentioned. It's the black and white film where they chant, "One of us, one of us." Absolutely great filmmaking. I loved his character in that movie, and I love the way that Pepper captures the spirit of that character in this show. There are several other characters that parallel real-life influences, but the last one that I'm going to mention on this show today is Twisty the Clown, who is clearly a callback to John Wayne Gacy, creepy clown performer turned serial killer. So overall, Freak Show is a really fascinating look at behind the scenes in a freak show. There's a lot of psychology in there. I really enjoyed this particular season. I think you will too, so definitely take a binge. I spent a lot of time talking about this one because it is one of my favorites. We are going to go ahead and cut to a break. When we come back, we're going to pick up with Season 5 of American Horror Story, Hotel.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. We've been talking about American Horror Story. We are now on Season 5, Hotel. Season 5 is interconnected with the first and third seasons, and it is the first season to not include the actors Jessica Lange and Frances Conroy. The new additions to the cast are Lady Gaga and Cheyenne Jackson. Other than that, there's a lot of returning people. The plot centers around the mysterious Hotel Cortez in Los Angeles, California. It catches the eye of a homicide detective. The Cortez is host to many disturbing scenarios and paranormal events. It's overseen by its enigmatic matron, the Countess, who's played by Lady Gaga. She is a blood-sucking fashionista. The hotel is loosely based on an actual hotel from 1893 in Chicago, Illinois. The real-life inspiration was built by H.H. Holmes and was basically built to torture, murder, and dispose of evidence, much like in the Cortez. Really, it was known as the Murder Castle. I find that history makes this a really creepy, sort of a rich story as well. There's a little bit of a Shining vibe because we're in a big creepy hotel. I particularly enjoy The Shining, so I don't have a problem with that. Overall, though, this is probably my least favorite of all of the seasons of this show. I dug some of the things they did with the vampires. Some of the characters, some of them that are in the show are very interesting, but most of them really are not. I stuck it out and I watched the whole season hoping that I was going to be wrong and there was going to be some big twist that was going to pull it all together. There was a twist. It did get pulled together, but not enough to redeem the rest of the season. I think that if you're going to skip a season of American Horror Story, this would be one that's probably okay to skip. However, there are some callbacks to this particular hotel in future seasons. And so if you're a purist like me and you like to get that complete story, just grit your teeth and get through it. It's not all that bad. Lady Gaga does a good job in the role that she's very believable in her character. I'm just not particularly a fan of her acting skills, I guess. I found this particular season to be a little bit tedious to get through. Maybe it was a little too predictable for me. I just felt like overall, in the American Horror Story world, some of their other stories had been so textural and so interesting. I didn't get that from this particular story, and so I feel like I could have done without it. So, let's see. Some of the things I did like, again, are the parallels to the real life inspiring characters. So H.H. Holmes being one of them. Mr. March is the equivalent inside this show. We also see an Aileen Wuornos character, which is pretty interesting. Richard Ramirez makes an appearance. Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy. So really we're seeing a lot of serial killers pop up here and there. But again, I find their story interesting, and actually there's an episode with all of them together. That episode is my favorite episode in the entire season, so just going to throw that out there. I really don't have much else to say about that particular season, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to Season 6, Roanoke, which came out in 2016. Roanoke happens to be my favorite season of all the seasons so far. I definitely hope that they keep working towards beating Roanoke, because I would absolutely love to see some more of this. Roanoke is really interesting because it takes on a totally different format than the other seasons had taken on. I really liked that creativity and how they really turned themselves upside down and took a new approach. It was very refreshing, especially in the 6th season of a show. But they stuck true to some of the things that make American Horror Story such an interesting show to watch. Of course, a lot of our old favorites, as far as the actors are concerned, make a return. Cuba Gooding Jr. does join the cast, as well as Andre Holland. So that's really interesting. When it comes to this particular season, the creators of the show were very careful to actually hide what the topic was going to be until the last minute. We do end up finding out that the season incorporates the infamous 1580s Roanoke colony disappearance. So there's your play on history. It follows a paranormal documentary that's being filmed, called My Roanoke Nightmare. So this season actually plays out more like a documentary that's being filmed, and we follow along with that. So more of a found footage type of feel for at least part of the season, which I really thought was nice and fresh for the series. The characters are really interesting. Kathy Bates blows me away every time I see her in anything, but this is absolutely no exception to that. Overall, the season got positive reviews. It was well liked by many, so I definitely think you should give it a watch. The environment of the show is frightening. It's in that rural type of area. There's not much there, but of course the creepy woods. We don't know what happened to the people who disappeared in Roanoke. I mean, it's, one of those American legends actually in real life, so who knows what happened. They do a good job of painting a plausible story and making it creepy as heck. Some interesting trivia bits from this particular season. Angela Bassett actually directed the 6th episode of the season. It is a great episode, so good job. Definitely give it a watch. Honestly, I just can't say enough good things about this particular season. So on that note, we should probably transition to the next season, which was season 7 of American Horror Story, Cult. This aired in 2017. So Hotel is definitely not my favorite season, but Cult is on that list as well. I think that it could be that this particular season feels too real, too current. I mean, the opening episode of this season opens with finding out that Trump is president. I'm not a political person. It's not my jam. And so I just didn't dig this season as much. It really felt real for those of you who are driven by political interests. This particular show really plays up on current events and problems and things like that. Terrorism is a theme. It is an interesting story. I stuck it through. I was not bored for a second. I just felt really uncomfortable watching it. I felt like I was just watching the news or modern events, and that is so unfortunate to be able to say that about our world now. Well, this particular season takes place in the fictional suburb of Brookfield Heights in Michigan during the year 2017. It centers around a cult that is terrorizing residents in the aftermath of the 2016 presidential election. This particular season did win several awards, including several Emmys and Best Actor in a Limited Series. So, it was critically acclaimed. Good for them. But like I said, just a little too real. When I dig into a show like American Horror Story, it has horror in the title. Yes, the political climate in America, it can be related to a lot of horror stories. But when I guess I watch this kind of stuff to escape and live vicariously and get a little adrenaline rush. And like I said, this feeling so real, it wasn't the mood that I was in. I wanted to escape from all those things. I happen to live in a very politically charged area, and it just didn't tickle my fancy to watch a show about the things that were happening across the street from my house, No, I was not in a cult. Just throwing that out there, world. So overall, you're looking for realism and that's what you want to get out of American Horror Story, then you go right ahead and jump to Cult, season 7. It is still a good watch. The actors did a great job. It has some of our favorites in there. But like I said, overall, not my favorite season. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and go to break on that wonderful positive note. When we come back, we're going to talk about season 8 of American Horror Story, Apocalypse.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Okay, welcome back. We've been talking about American Horror Story. We have reached season 8, American Horror Story's Apocalypse. This season originally aired in 2018, It is the most recent season that you can access on Netflix. So definitely go on there and binge right up to the end of Apocalypse. Apocalypse has been called a crossover for the first and third seasons of the series. I feel like that's a pretty accurate description, really. It does take some of the characters and some of the backstory from Murder House and mix that in with Coven. In fact, some of the same characters make a reappearance, and the history that is behind the Apocalypse really starts back at the Murder House story. So I absolutely love callbacks and tie-ins like this. But it is its own individual story, and so I'm definitely interested in that as well. The best way to sum up what this particular season is about, it is definitely a post-apocalyptic world. We start out the season finding a couple of characters that are pulled from their regular lives to be saved because they are chosen. We have no idea what that means. They get shipped off to some facility after the apocalypse happens. Most of humanity's dead. The majority of this particular season happens within an underground type of a shelter, where there's a handful of survivors that are basically living under the rule of the people who run the shelter. It's definitely an interesting story, but I feel like it could have been done a lot better. It's a slow burn. It really is. I was not on the edge of my seat. I think the thing that kept me going is I wanted to know what was going on outside. Are we ever going to find out what happened? Who else is alive? And then just when you start to abandon all hope, new characters show up and you're like, I didn't know there could have been anybody else alive in this world. So I found that to be interesting. I did watch all the way to the end. Like I said, I was never bored, but I don't know how well I actually liked it. In the end of this particular season, I was left going, The last couple episodes where you really start to get those tie-ins, I found were a lot more interesting. The action picks up a lot, but the first episode's great. The last maybe 3 episodes are great, but those middle episodes are a little tedious to get through. So if they had just condensed it down and cut out some of the fluff, then maybe it would have been a more interesting show. One thing that I do find interesting is that because we start to see characters from the previous seasons show up or interact with the characters in this season, we really start to see the actors playing multiple characters that they have played in the American Horror Story shows over the years and spanning over a couple of different seasons, which is pretty great if you can keep track of who they're supposed to be at what time when they're acting. But overall, I liked it. I love a good callback. Now, of course, this show typically will base its characters or actions on real-life events in history, or at least have some deep influences in things that have happened. Doesn't appear to be as true in this particular season. It's more of a callback, like get the band back together type of season. I have heard people compare this particular season to Avengers Infinity War. It is, it does call back to a lot of like apocalyptic type of movies and get some influence from there. Also, even in real life, there have been prophecies and people who sit around and ponder the end of the earth, and so that's wrapped up in there as well. But we do see some of the characters from some of the other seasons that are based on real life inspired events, and those hold true. One of them being Tate from Murder House, who is based on the Columbine murders at the school. Overall, this season really feels like a mixed bag of a season. Great callbacks, interesting story, could have been wonderful, wasn't my favorite. And that leads us to the most recent season of American Horror Story, 1984, which aired this year and ended in November. This is definitely up there in my top 3 of favorite seasons. It is a huge callback to basically anything horror related from the 1980s. 1984 just seems to be the culmination of all of that. So I found it absolutely glorious. I did not get bored at any point. I really enjoyed comparing all the little tropes to some of my favorite lifelong horror, movies and series that I've watched in my lifetime. There's some heavy influence from Friday the 13th. There's some Halloween in there. I like to think that Sleepaway Camp also sprinkled a little bit of love in there. Overall, the costumes are amazing. There is one character who actually comments about how everybody just hates her because she has such rad hair. That is such a quotable line. I have found more than one occasion to use that in real life, I'm not gonna lie. As far as trivia is concerned, the Chet character is an embittered would-be Olympian who is actually played by real-life Olympic skier Gus Kenworthy. I found that to be interesting. Also find it interesting that Emma Roberts in this season plays sort of the nice girl, the final girl, playing into those classic horror movie tropes. Whereas in a lot of the seasons in American Horror Story, she plays sort of the boss girl, the bitchy a-hole type, the alpha character, and that's not the case. In this particular season, she's more of a goody two-shoes, lovable type character, almost to the nauseating type of sense. As I said before, I'm a huge horror fan, and one of the things that I love about the serial killer, multi episode type of horror movies like Freddy and Jason and Chucky and even Final Destination and Saw, those kinds of movies, as you're moving along through the series of films, you're really taking a look at how can I kill people in the most interesting, clever way. And this particular season of American Horror Story definitely plays into that horror movie trope. There's some very interesting kills. It upholds the rules that exist inside the American Horror Story universe, such as in Murder House. One of the things that they've established is that if somebody dies in the murder house, their ghost is stuck in the murder house, and that happens as well with 1984. It's a summer camp movie. All the teenage camp counselors come out for the summer to escape whatever it is that's bothering them in their real life. And each character has an interesting backstory. They've all got something that they're running from rather than running to. The summer camp itself, many years before, was the site of an awful serial killing, and one of the survivors has decided to reopen the camp in a way of cleansing herself from that awful past. And once all of the camp counselors are present, things start to unravel, of course, because that's what makes it an interesting show. Like I said, it's up there in my top 3 of favorite seasons, might be my second favorite season after Roanoke. I highly recommend that you watch it. Of course, being a purist, I believe that you should start at the beginning with Murder House and work your way all the way through to 1984. And that way you'll be all caught up and ready for whatever unfolds in next season. There better be a next season, because I love this show. Alright, so we are going to take another break. When we come back, we are going to talk about what you can watch if you're caught up on American Horror Story, and some titles that you might enjoy based on each season's storylines. So we'll catch you on the other side of this break.
Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the backdoors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Welcome back from that break. We've been talking about American Horror Story, and of course, I don't want to leave you hanging once you're done with the show, because the show is totally bingeable. So I'm going to go season by season real quick here and give you some other titles that you may enjoy based on whether or not you enjoyed that particular season. So we're going to go ahead and start out with Murder House. If you enjoyed the season 1 of American Horror Story, Murder House, you'll probably enjoy The Haunting at Hill House, which is one of my favorite shows currently. It is available on Netflix. There's one season out, and in 2020, they're supposed to do a second season. I did hear that the second season is going to be anthology style as well, where it'll be a totally different story than the first season, but hopefully have some of the same writers and directors because it was amazing. Another thing that you'll like if you like Murder House would be Amityville Horror. That is a movie that's available to stream on Hulu. It's a straight up horror movie about a scary house and the things that have happened there. It's a good movie. There's the classic one, and then there's a remake as well. I happen to enjoy both of them, so have at it. And then there's The Haunting in Connecticut. That is also available to stream on Hulu. It is a really great movie if you're into the whole haunted house scenario type of thing. Alright, if you enjoyed season 2 of American Horror Story, Asylum, then the first thing I'd like to recommend is Session 9. Session 9 is my favorite Asylum-based movie of all time. It's absolutely frightening. I've watched it several times. It is available to rent on Amazon Prime, so I highly, highly recommend that you go on and stream that, because you're missing out if you haven't seen it and if you like horror at all. Another good Asylum type of movie is Shelter Island, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. I really enjoyed this. It's nice and twisty. It has some surprises in it. It's a little bit creepy, but it's more psychological in nature. All around, though, really, really fun movie to watch. And that's available on Prime as well. If you enjoyed season 3 of American Horror Story, Coven, then the first show that comes to mind to watch is Discovery of Witches. You can get it on Comcast On Demand, and hopefully it'll show up on another streaming service soon. But it's a really great show. I binged it and basically swallowed it whole. It was so good. Highly recommend that to anybody who's into any kind of witch lore or, any of those kind of shows. For Coven, I would also recommend The Craft, which is my all-time guilty pleasure favorite witch movie. It came out when I was pretty young, and actually part of it was filmed at the high school that I went to, so there's that as well. But it's a really fun movie about teenagers who are witches, who are coming of age and sort of figuring out what to do with that. with this power that they have, and that's kind of what that season of American Horror Story is about as well. So some good parallels there. Coven is definitely more up to date than The Craft, but still, it's a great watch. You can get that on Amazon Prime. For season 4, Freak Show, I highly recommend that you watch the old classic black and white film Freaks. You can get it on Amazon Prime. You can rent it from there. Otherwise, go to your libraries, look around, because this is a movie that you don't want to miss. It's a piece of classic movie making. And I remember watching it throughout my time growing up. I studied it when I was in college, taking some film courses. Just a really well done, very twisty, cool movie. And the other one for Freak Show that I wanted to recommend would be Big Fish. It is a Tim Burton movie. It's available to stream on Hulu. I know that Big Fish is not a horror movie, but it does have that wonderful circus sideshow type of aesthetic to it. It's a lot of fun. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. Tim Burton is amazing. So I highly recommend that. Also, if you're into sort of people who are different, then I would recommend the Miss Peregrine's Home for Unusual Children. That is also a really great movie. You can get that on Amazon Prime. Okay, so for season 5, Hotel, this being my least favorite, I really had to think about what I would recommend in between it. But I landed on The Shining because it is that, it does have a similar feel, that big, vast, you're stuck here type of a place, the long hallways, what's behind this door, the ghosts that pop up, so there's a lot of parallels there. The other movie that I landed on was 1408, which also takes place in a hotel, but it's about being haunted internally and the things that come up. So there's some good recommendations. Both of those are available on Prime. For season 6, Roanoke, I would highly recommend any of the Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventurers type of shows. There's several of them out there. One of them that I like is Ghost Adventures on Hulu. So recommend that you stream that if you're into that. Let's go and see if we can catch creepy stuff on film type of stuff. And really any found footage type movies. So Blair Witch was really the first of those. That's available on Starz. So I recommend that you check that out. Season 7 of American Horror Story, Cult. I would recommend The Purge. There's a show on Hulu, which I haven't watched yet, but I didn't know until I was researching where you can stream these things. So I'm definitely going to be binging that in the coming week. But the movie is available to stream as well on Amazon. There's also on Hulu this really cool show called Cults and Extreme Beliefs. It's a reality documentary type of show, and the information that they give is really interesting, and it gives you some insight into some people that may not think about the world the same way that you do. For season 8's Apocalypse, I recommend 2012, which is available to stream on Prime. Of course, it's just that stereotypical end of the world thing. But there is that sense of the elitist, only the few that are rich or privileged can be saved type of a thing happening as well. Also, Escape Room on Starz. Escape Room is a great movie if you're into that, like, how do we get out of this small space? And I feel like over the course of the Apocalypse season, there's a lot of those kind of themes. And last but certainly not least, for season 9, American Horror Story 1984, of course, I would recommend Friday the 13th. Binge the entire Friday the 13th, series, all of the movies, shows, great stuff on Sci-Fi. The Halloween movies you can get on HBO Now, and my favorite of the camper type of horror movies would be Sleepaway Camp, which is available on Amazon Prime. Alright, so we're going to go to a break. When we come back, we're going to do Set It on Reddit, and I'm going to give you my top 10 anthology type movies or shows and where to stream them.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Alright, welcome back. We've been talking about American Horror Stories. We have wrapped up that segment and we're moving on to Set It on Reddit. So, from NDRW17, camp is fun, but camp is not always well executed with American Horror Stories. They have begun relying on camp with the last few seasons, and any sort of emotional connection with anything else is losing its footing. I can agree with that in some ways. The season Cult really tried to be funny in places, and I feel like sometimes they were trying a little bit too hard. Let's see. This one is from a username that's been deleted. If you don't consider Billy Eichner screaming while wearing a sombrero one of the highlights of television history, then I don't know how to have a conversation with you. I mean, of course, I agree. Who wouldn't? This one is from Thespis41. It's important to remember that isolation and desolation of an apocalyptic event wouldn't necessarily have reached these characters yet. By the end of the episode, we've lurched 18 months forward. We're presented with a different style. The characters seem to be more desperate and less campy. I'm all for this season's tone, but I hope that they're building up towards a slow horror. They did build up to a very, very slow horror. I do agree, though, that the sense of isolation really was just thrown at us in that season. Almost like we were being forced to think or feel a certain way without really having any context for that yet. Alright, well that's it for Set It on Reddit. All of the really good ones, as usual, had a bunch of spoilers, and I didn't want to spoil anything for you because I want you to go on there and binge. So, we're going to move on to the top 10 anthology type movies or shows and where to stream them. These are my personal top 10. I'm going to start at 10, work down to 1. I stuck kind of with the horror thriller type of genre because that's what American Horror Story is. And yeah, so here we go. Alright, so number 10 on my list is Tales from the Hood. You can stream this on Starz. Tales from the Hood is a hilarious movie. I remember watching it when I was little. There is a sequel that came out, which I didn't think was as good as the original. Maybe some of the topics are more current. But overall, I think that Tales from the Hood is hilarious and twisty and horribly awesome. On number 9, I have ABCs of Death. This is a movie where different directors were given a letter of the alphabet and asked to make a short horror story about it. And that's just so cool. The resulting stories were really awesome. And you have to be creative to do that, really. It's available on Prime. Highly recommend that you watch it. VHS comes in at number 8. This is also a really fun horror movie. Some of it is actually pretty creepy, but the idea is that somebody finds this VHS tape and they watch it, and there's different found footage type videos on there that are all supposedly real. And then there's some nice twists as well. You can stream that on Amazon Prime. Number 7, I have the show Tales from the Crypt. There's a movie as well. I recommend that too. You can get both on Amazon Prime. Tales from the Crypt, I remember watching this when I was way too young to be watching this. And there are some episodes that really stick out for me. There's one in particular that still to this day really creeps me out. And I haven't even seen the episode in a really long time. So I recommend Tales from the Crypt from anybody who's looking for some creeps and chills. Number 6 on my list is Outer Limits. This is another really great show. You can stream it on Hulu. You can actually stream the original series and the more updated version. Both are really great. I grew up watching the updated version, though the old originals are also very clever. Some really great episodes, definitely sci-fi and cool. At number 5 on my list is Cat's Eye. Cat's Eye is a Stephen King movie that it twists together all kinds of characters and events from Stephen King's universe. It's got Drew Barrymore and a whole lot of other really famous people in it. There's a scene with a little monster that steals Drew Barrymore's breath. After seeing this when I was a little kid, I slept with my head under the covers for quite a while. It doesn't quite have the same effect now watching it because it is an older CGI type of thing. I believe it's more claymation style, so the effects don't stand up, but still, very creepy story. I absolutely love it. It's got some humor in there too. Clever, especially if you're a Stephen King fan. At the number 4 spot, I've got Twilight Zone. So, of course, there's a new version of Twilight Zone, which you can stream on CBS All Access, or you can watch the Rod Serling originals on Netflix. Twilight Zone is just a classic show, and the updated show also has some really great storylines and some callbacks to the original series, so I really enjoyed both of them. So go ahead and binge. There's lots and lots to watch there. At number 3, I put Creeped Out from Netflix. Now this is a horror anthology show that's geared more towards children, maybe older children, but still children. I still really enjoyed it. I found the topics to be current, the twists and turns to be great. I actually watched this show with my 14-year-old, and she really enjoyed it too. You can get that on Netflix. Coming in at number 2 on my list is Black Mirror, which you can get on Netflix. I have so much to say about Black Mirror. Black Mirror it's a show about technology, and if we could fill our lives with these different kinds of technology, what would be the cost? And there are some intense seasons. There are some intense episodes and some twists and turns, and I absolutely love this show, mostly because it's so real. Like, these things are probably going to happen. So if you want to see what the future in our world looks like, go on and watch Black Mirror. Like I said, it's available on Netflix. And the last number 1 top of my anthology horror thriller type of list is Trick or Treat. This movie, I watch it every Halloween and probably a couple of other times throughout the year. You can stream it on Prime. Trick or Treat is, to me, horror perfection from beginning to end. The way that all of the stories seamlessly blend into each other. The acting is good. It's creepy. It's relevant. It's a really good time. I really like it. So, Trick or Treat, my number one anthology in the horror genre of all time. Well, that's it, guys. Thank you so much for listening to the GSMC TV podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, write us a review. It always helps us out. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the different things. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you on the flippity flip.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.